With the imminent arrival of a tariff-loving president of the United States of America in January, who believes those tariffs will cure all of America's decline in manufacturing problems, we ask the stark question: does China even need the US market at all? Or Europe? After all, they do not currently sell many EVs directly into America, and those they do currently supply to Europe account for only about 50% of China's total EV exports. Where will, or more likely, where has China already set its sights? I'm Dave. This is Dave Takes It On. Where are the rest of the Chinese EV exports going? Get ready to be enlightened. The world is much bigger than the US and Europe. If you would, please subscribe to this video. It really does help the channel. Well, both Europe and the US are on a collision course with China over the perceived dumping of cheap EVs onto the market, thereby destroying local EV manufacturers. That is the perception. That is the reason for imposing tariffs, openly stated. But the reality is immediately revealed to be much less certain. Well, first fact, the US currently imports almost zero Chinese EVs directly, a trivial number. So at least in America, any existing decline in automakers' factories, workforces or profits is not down to China. That obviously begs the question, why impose tariffs on products that are not actually being imported? It can only be to stop a feared massive future growth in such imports before they happen that would add additional closures or sackings or loss of profits. It's preventative. Now, Europe's very different. First, Europe already does import many EVs direct from China. In 2023, it's almost 500,000 of them. So tariffs here are intended to stop or slow down that trade. So in one way, that sort of does make sense. That market has already grown in 2024, with September just alone seeing 60,000 Chinese EVs built in China being sold in Europe. But what's the problem? Again, the perception is that China is unfairly subsidizing their EVs to gain an advantage. But are they? The WTO, World Trade Organization, rules to which both China and Europe comply closely monitor unfair subsidies and can take action to correct any breaches. So is China in breach? Well, no, not yet anyway. Well, instead of the EU Commission applying to the WTO for an investigation, it's a normal course of events, or acting on behalf of a private or public company which had raised such a request for them to investigate, here the EU just decided to do it all on its own. It seems the EU has appointed itself the judge, jury, executioner in deciding it is in breach, guilty as charged, and has already applied its punishment, tariffs. This bypasses the World Trade Organization. The correct action would have been to apply to the WTO with proof, allow them to investigate, come to their own conclusion, at which point, if in breach, the WTO itself can take action against China. If that action is deemed to be unsatisfactory, there's a right of appeal. But the EU rather gives the game away when they state in their own internal investigation that, quote, as a result of China's efforts to dominate the electric vehicles market, China now produces 70% of the world's electric cars, jeopardizing productive investments elsewhere. No mention of government subsidies, merely the fact that China's too big and a threat. That is not part of the WTO remit. It cannot be used to limit or restrict companies or countries that just get too big. The EU tariffs could actually be illegal or at least in breach of WTO rules. Well, China has been staggeringly successful in building up its domestic EV industry and EV support industry, making batteries. How they did this does not detract from that fact, but it's also a fact that countries around the world, including virtually all the EU and non-EU countries, they also directly subsidize key industries. UK, for example, just recently gave £500 million to Tata Steel and subsidises other industries like aerospace, life sciences and renewable energy sectors. So we in the UK don't seem to consider Chinese subsidies to be illegal, immoral or just plain wrong. We appear to welcome their EVs into our market. Glass houses and stones spring to mind. And in an absolutely classic irony that they have not yet spotted, the detractors of EVs shout and scream for the end of subsidies for EVs, yet they are today lobbying the UK government for subsidies or special allowances to the ICE industry to help them compete. Have they no shame? So let's leave the legality and morality of how China got so big and look at what impact, if any, tariffs will likely have here in Europe, in the US, and also in China. The US first. They currently do not import any appreciable number of Chinese EVs directly, so that sector will see almost no impact, pretty much absolute zero. But again, in a bitter irony, it will directly impact legacy auto, Ford and General Motors specifically, who to this day still buy in Chinese-made ICE vehicles for sale in the US. Buick Envision sold by General Motors and Lincoln Nautilus sold by Ford. They're both manufactured in China. So any tariffs aimed at the Chinese EV auto industry are likely to directly hammer America's domestic auto industry new car sales figures in petrol and diesel cars. Shooting and foot spring to mind. Now, Europe. It is a more complicated situation because here Europe does buy in EVs directly from China, does have a number of joint ventures where European automakers join with Chinese EV makers to make kits in China that are shipped and then assembled in Europe, and so try to bypass any tariffs. There are two huge problems with this. First, these tariffs are equally likely to be aimed at those joint ventures and so have a huge impact on existing EU assembly jobs. Companies like Stellantis and Renault have spent billions investing in them. They probably will not take kindly to finding out that they cannot sell these assembled EVs in Europe as European and cannot bypass the tariffs at all. But the bigger problem is the idea that if you put up the price of imported EVs by way of tariffs, your buying population will simply switch to buying your locally produced, lower spec and much dearer EVs instead. There is no indication in an economic market that is hovering on the brink of recession and with high interest rates and auto loans that this will happen. Quite the opposite, in fact. So many people have just been citing the collapse of the EV market in Germany this year as the likely end of EVs. It isn't, but that collapse of EV sales was triggered when existing government subsidies were removed, making buying an EV in Germany much dearer. Germans simply stopped buying as many EVs. It is highly likely that raising the price of EVs by way of tariffs will see an equal or greater collapse of the EV market. Not quite what they were intending. Well, finally, we get to China. We find that Mexico is the surprise recipient of the largest number of EVs exported from China other than to the US or Europe. But that's a wildly influenced figure. China did not sell those cars to the Mexican domestic market. That's quite small. It's a little over 1 million units a year. The Chinese ICE and EV sales were destined to be sold on to the US market, which regards Mexican manufactured ICE cars and EVs, even kits from China, as domestic vehicles for the awarding of subsidies and tax incentives, a way of bypassing anti-China tariffs current in America. A backdoor. But now with tariffs likely to be applied to Mexico as well as to China, this market is likely to collapse. So who's left? Well, the world's biggest car market was China. In the past, manufacturers from around the world saw this as their main export market, and the Chinese offered almost zero competition. Their domestically produced ICE cars were quite pathetic. But 20 years ago, China abandoned its ICE car industry altogether and switched lock, stock and barrel onto EVs. They saw that as the future. Today, they are still the world's largest car market, but also the home to the world's largest manufacturers of quality high-tech EVs. China is supplying almost all of its own demand for EVs from local EV factories, and previous demand for quality prestige brands like BMW, Mercedes, even Rolls-Royce means that the world's largest car market is not being supplied by, well, anyone anymore. The entire Chinese car market has just about given up on ICE cars altogether. That has left China with a unique problem. They have a huge overcapacity of EV production. And with existing markets like Europe and emerging markets like the US closing down, their attention in recent years has switched to emerging markets. Welcome, Indonesia. It's got a population about 278 million, getting up towards that of America. It's over a third of the European population. Well, previously it was supplied exclusively by local factories nearby in Japan, like Toyota and Honda. It's absolutely wide open to Chinese EVs, and China has been working here and selling here for many years, becoming well established, taking over. Why, many ask? Well, Jakarta, the capital, has a very serious problem with air pollution. Jakarta ranks in the top 10 worst in the world. For them, a transition to EVs is almost compulsory, and we are seeing that switch starting. EV sales are targeted to increase threefold this year, 2024, up to 50,000 units, and it's aiming for 2 million EV cars, 13 million EV motorcycles by 2030. That would be a value of the EV market of 20 billion. That's an open market with exponential growth. A quick look at the Indonesia Stock Exchange sees a very rapid and large swing to stocks and shares involved in EVs and renewable energy, and specific projects like that. The government also launched a state-backed carbon trading exchange. Or about Malaysia? Well, EV sales are up 286% from 2022. Now, accepted this is from a very low base, but with a population of 3 times the size of Belgium, it's a good-sized market worth as much as 200 million by 2028 on government targets. But these are small fry. Let's move up to the Premier League. BRICS. This is representing Brazil, Russia, India, China, and also South Africa, India, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. Well, right at the bottom is Brazil with about 29 million people. It's already the largest importer of Chinese EVs in Latin America, with ambitious plans for much more. Compound annual growth rates projected to be nearly 17% a year between 2024 and 2028 makes it already worth 735 million in 2023. The same drivers of EV adoption exist here: air quality, climate change, and an additional bonus, an abundant supply of green electricity with massive hydropower generation. China is taking 90% of the Brazilian EV market with brands such as BYD, GWM, Geely, and Chery. Russia, I think we can pass over for the moment. Their efforts are going, well, elsewhere other than EVs. But when the war's over, that's a big market, and China's already there. India is a different matter. It is there today, population 1.4 billion, and pollution problems on an entirely different level. India recently recorded lethal levels of airborne pollution, many times the mere dangerous to health levels. And exhaust emissions from cars is the primary source, along with burning fuels for electricity generation. Well, this country is heading towards being completely uninhabitable due to air pollution, and it has no other alternative. If it gets worse, population will just start dying in unacceptable numbers. Last year, it cost an estimated $36.8 billion in absenteeism, reduced productivity, and reduced purchasing because people couldn't venture out of doors to go shopping due to the air pollution. It must stop burning fossil fuels, and it must do it right now. Well, traditionally, India has been a homegrown domestic production centre with massive tariffs on imports of anything up to 100%. But the local manufacturing cannot get anywhere near the sort of size India needs to keep its population and economy alive. It will need outside help and a lot of imports. China's already there in massive numbers. It is already India's biggest importer with a value of some $116 billion last year. Well, in EVs, India's growing massively, 49% up 2023 compared to 2022, and already up 21% on that figure in 2024 up to the end of May, 1.39 million units. Good market. Total EVs, including buses, cars and bikes, exceed 4.1 million as of March this year. Compare that to America with over 1 million full EVs on the road. Yeah, Tesla sold 1.2 million in 2023, but not all of them were to their home market. You would begin to see how important the US market is to China, or not. India's stock exchange is also reporting a massive increase in investments in both EVs, renewable energy generation, including things like Inox Wind, Orient Green Power Company and Tata Power Company. The Indian green and EV markets are seeing a massive surge in demand, but none of these should be regarded as investment advice, merely a recognition of the growth of EV and green investments and the potential for Chinese EV companies operating here. A recent survey revealed that 83% of Indian buyers will consider EVs by 2030. So, smaller presence, it's just around 2% of the cars are EVs, but a staggering potential for a manufacturer like China. South Africa is also interesting. Similar population to the UK, around 60 million. They too are looking at EVs as the future, with plans to achieve 20% of new sales by 2025, bit behind us. I think the point is made. In a trade war with Europe or the US, China could easily, happily, profitably just shut down their operations and concentrate elsewhere. The US and Europe, it is a rich and profitable market, but by no means the only one. Without Chinese EV sales reaching America, that market will swiftly dwindle to negligible as US auto industry as a whole almost reverts to ICE cars and concentrates on the expensive, more profitable end of even that market. Tesla will be the outlier. They're going to carry on doing what they're doing very successfully, supplying a slowly growing EV domestic market while switching its main attentions to markets in the rest of the world, like Australia. With advanced manufacturing techniques continuing to lower the production costs, these will get ever cheaper. Without cheap, affordable, quality Chinese EVs in Europe, the legacy auto industry is also unlikely to survive in any form. We got some exciting times ahead. I'm Dave. If you have enjoyed this, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. Makes a huge difference to a channel like ours. So thank you very much for watching. I'm Dave.